Joining us now is the man who does this now, tradition unlike any other at the end of the year. He's at Extra Innings Softball. And of course, currently you can check out their top 15 stories of the year 2022. I speak of Justin McLeod, who joins us to talk some of the end of the year topic stories of the year in softball, including the tradition unlike any other, the coaching carousel. Justin, how you doing?
We're doing good. A little cold, a little chilly, but
Yeah,
we're doing good.
we're all cold except Victor. Went down
Right.
in South Florida, where that's the only part in the country that's not cold, evidently. Uh,
Exactly.
there you go. Anyway, let's talk about some of the coaching moves. Obviously, uh, let's begin. Obviously, we'll talk about Megan Bartlett, for example, who depending if you're listening on this podcast, you just heard the interview with Megan Bartlett. We'll talk a little bit there later, but I have to begin with maybe the biggest coaching carousel of the year, and to me, Justin, the top story, one of the top stories of the year, if not the top story of the year, in my view, is Carol Hutchins announcing her sudden retirement in August as head coach of Michigan. And kind of what was fascinating to me about that, it's not that she retired, because I think there were kind of some wondering, especially I happened to be at her last regionals, it turns out, the Orlando regionals. You can see I'm wearing the shirt for those YouTube subscribers. I was
Right.
there. That's my I was there. But I wondered after that regional, boy, this could be it, right? But then time went on and it's like, maybe not. And then I'll never forget it was a Wednesday in August, I believe, Justin, where Michigan came out with the statement, oh yeah, Hutch is stepping down and retiring, which in today's day and age for nobody, and people were floored by it. Nobody saw it coming. In this day and age where there's rumors and gossip, nobody saw that coming, which I thought was fascinating about it. One of the many aspects of it. Your thoughts on as we begin the coaching carousel? To me, I know it's a little bit backwards. We'll get into some of the other moves, but to me, Coach Hutch, to me, is one of the top stories of 2022. Her retirement as the all-time winningest Division I head coach in softball history, deciding to retire in a random Wednesday, August.
Well, and to be fair, that's honestly very Hutch. Very, very quiet until it came out. Just random timing. That's very Hutch over the years. That kind of fits into her style. There were a lot of rumors at the end of 2022. I remember actually I was at the Women's College World Series, and I was greeting someone that I know, and it was a group, 2 or 3 people in the group, former player at Michigan, some folks who knew Hutch, and they looked at me and go, "Well, is Hutch retiring?" Even then from that kind of a group, there was curiosity, and then she didn't. And it's like, okay, well, obviously, at some point she's going to. Nobody coaches forever, and you kind of go through the summer. It's like, okay, well, at least one more year of Hutch, and then August, a week before the September 1st, when you can contact juniors, oh well, she's retiring. I think different things led into the timing, but truth be told, I mean, that to me, Hutch retiring completed the cycle of what I call almost an end of an era. Mike Candrea retiring last year started it. I think Hutch retiring kind of completed it. It's almost like a changing of the guard that she was the last domino to fall, so to speak. She was all-time winningest, like you say. She had it before. Mike Candrea passed her. She passed him this past year, so she retires as the all-time winningest. It's one of those things. It was a lot of fanfare in that moment, nothing leading up to it, like you say. A lot of fanfare in that moment, a lot of people paying attention to it, but you can almost feel that seismic change of, okay, well, there's no more Hutch. Because now, if you think about it, who fills that role? I'm not sure there's an obvious answer. I'm really not.
I agree with you. I don't know who that will be moving forward. That could be one of the questions of 2023, obviously. Now,
Sure.
Bonnie Toll was named the new head coach, was promoted from within. You have spoken to Bonnie Toll since then. Tell us a little bit about Bonnie Toll and what you gathered from your conversation with her now as she steps into those shoes, taking over for Hutch.
Well, the thing about Michigan is they've been so successful for so long that even their down years are good years to most people. So maintaining that level of consistency, I think, was pretty key for Michigan. And Bonnie, she played there. She's coached there for, how many decades now. She was the obvious choice. I don't think you're going to see a lot change, but at the same time, I think you're going to see Bonnie put her own stamp on Michigan. I think there are going to be a few things that maybe Bonnie does differently or that Michigan does differently under Bonnie, just because it's Bonnie's way. I think you're going to see her put her own mark on it, but at the same time, there's not going to be a tide turning specifically at Michigan. It's definitely an end of an era and a change, but I don't think you're going to see a totally new Michigan because of the coaching change. Maybe you will because of talent turnover in some ways, but I don't think you're going to because of the coaching change. I think that was super important for Michigan, and I think Bonnie's the only one, honestly, in a position to uphold that.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting story. Of course, Bonnie told Michigan that era will begin in Tampa, Florida, against South Florida on a Thursday night, February 9th. I know you're planning on being down there. Hopefully it's a little warmer by then than it is right
Amen.
now.
Amen.
It can't be any colder. And ironically about that, Michigan, that's going to start in Tampa. Her Hutch era ended in Orlando, ironically enough. We'll get to that a little bit later on. But I want to get into some more of the coaching carousel here. Because I thought really going into the year, the big storyline would be Texas A&M. Joe Evans and Texas A&M part ways. We'll get to Joe Evans later. And so you were at the World Series where all the hoopla was about who would end up at Texas A&M. And that saga would play out. And it turns out it would be Trisha Ford coming over from Arizona State. We just had Trisha Ford on the podcast. You can check that out on our podcast feeds as well as on our YouTube channel and hear her explanation of why she moved on to Texas A&M. But take it from your standpoint, because you were at OKC as all this was unfolding here, and just give us an idea, because this was, at the time we thought this was going to be one of the top stories of the year, and it still is to an extent, but it was unique from the standpoint of the plot twist on this.
And on the probably 11, 12 years, I guess, now that I've covered college softball, there have been two jobs where an aspect of their coaching search genuinely surprised me. Texas a few years ago was one, and Texas A&M this summer was the other. And I say that because when it became pretty obvious, pretty clear that Texas A&M was going to open, that Joe Evans' contract would not be renewed, okay, Texas A&M jobs on the market, so to speak. When you start looking at, for instance, a list of who might be the next head coach, you start looking at who makes sense, start looking at who's the school going to target, who's going to be interested. There's different factors that go into it. The one thing I did not expect from the A&M search was the number of people who said no. Given the facilities at Texas A&M, Davis Diamond, absolutely gorgeous, in my opinion, best facility in the country in college ball. The money that Texas A&M has, all the different aspects, I did not expect A&M to be told no as many times as they were. They were told no during World Series week. They were told no before World Series week. Obviously, ultimately, a search that ended up in Trisha Ford, reigning Pac-12 champion. She took ASU to the World Series in 2018. Got a good resume. Not their first choice, which made for a very interesting process. At the end of the day, A&M did get somebody they were able to win the press conference with. They did get somebody who knows how to win. A&M was a very interesting process, and one that there were aspects of it that took me by surprise. There were things that came out that I found out, etc., during that process that kind of made me raise an eyebrow. And, after 12 years in the business, that's hard to do. But A&M, to me, I expected them to dominate the summer. They did dominate the early portion of the carousel. And I think when we look back on this carousel in future years, for whatever reason it ends up being, I think A&M is still going to be the one from a job perspective that we look at first in terms of, okay, this one kind of led the way in terms of notoriety that summer.
Of course, Joe Evans is still going to be coaching. She a little bit while later, she would become the new head coach at UCSB. You got to, I think, cover her press conference. One of the few that can say that. What was that like? And you weren't surprised, because I remember you were following that story. You thought that kind of made a lot of sense.
she still had the fire in her belly to coach. Jo Evans did. She wasn't ready to be done coaching. That much was pretty clear when she left A&M, and it was really clear when she took the Santa Barbara job, honestly. She wanted to still coach. When she goes out, she wants to go out on her terms, whether that's 5 years down the road or however many. She's not ready to be done yet. The thing about the Santa Barbara job, it's in an area where she's familiar. It's a, I don't want to call it a low level job, but it's a lower level than A&M. There's not the daily news coverage of your softball program. You're not, televised press conferences. There's none of that kind of thing. The pressure is less, which means she can have fun coaching. If she wins, honestly, probably when she wins, considering it's Jo Evans, it's going to mean something more than if she wins at A&M, because, let's be honest, she finished above 500 at A&M by a game, and still made the tournament, but they were practically pariahs because people thought they didn't get in. Well, you get into with Santa Barbara to the tournament, you're going to be conquering heroes. It's a completely different feel. But my big takeaway was Jo Evans was not ready to be done coaching. Didn't care who knew it, didn't care what she had to do to prove it. And so now she's at Santa Barbara, got a coaching staff filled out, and going to try to make some waves in the Big West.
No doubt. That's going to be wild story there. But, of course, there's the third part of this little circle, and that is, well, who's taking over at Arizona State? And as it turns out, Justin, you would be watching the future head coach at Arizona State in Oklahoma City while you were covering the A&M story, because that would turn out to be Megan Bartlett, who was the assistant coach at Texas. She gets the Arizona State job and is back as a head coach after obviously being an assistant under Mike White at Texas, obviously. And I talked to her on the episode about the Mike White connection, and no doubt about it, that had an influence, as now you have her in the Pac-12 alongside Chelsea Spencer at Cal, among others. But that Texas run, which will, obviously a big story in itself, probably helped Megan Bartlett get back into head coaching and land at Arizona State.
Oh, it undoubtedly played a role in it. I think we've kind of seen that shift in the coaching carousel the last few years. Power 5 assistants are going to be top of the list. The thing about Bartlett is she was Power 5 assistant, came off that Texas run, but had been a head coach before. So she had that head coaching experience. But I think the thing that got me, the more I've looked at Arizona State through the summer, and actually I was in Arizona for some fall stuff back in November at Arizona State. So I kind of got to see a little bit of what that team's made of now going into the year. I think the thing that got me was Arizona State. Of course, you had the mass exoduses with transfers after Tricia Ford left. I think the thing that got me was you needed somebody who could build a project, who was willing to take it brick by brick, to use the old whatever football coach that was that made that infamous. You're Arizona State. You've just been dismantled as a reigning conference champion, as the reigning Pac-12 champion. You need somebody blue collar who can come in and rebuild the program, whether that's bringing in transfers, whether that's keeping the kids who are still there, whatever it means. And I think Megan Bartlett does fit that bill. And I think they've done that at Arizona State. At the same time, did the Texas run help? Absolutely. Nobody expected Texas to be in the World Series. Well, most people didn't expect to be in the World Series. Nobody expected them to be in the World Series final. So I think that plays a role, but at the same time, it's one of those for Arizona State where I think you needed somebody who fit a certain bill. Yes, somebody who can win. Yes, somebody who can keep the program at a winning level. But in this moment, this summer, this year, and even honestly building off of this year, you need somebody who can have that project, have that build. And I think Bartlett's got that.
And maybe made the most important assistant hire, which is the same guy that was at Arizona State, which is Jimmy Kalaitis, who was at Arizona State and convinced him to stay. I thought that was a big first step for Megan Bartlett there.
Super important, imperative to success. I think keeping Jimmy Kalaitis not only makes her tenure off to the right start, I think it keeps the players who are at Arizona State happy, because Jimmy Kalaitis is a popular guy there in Tempe with this program. But at the same time, Jimmy Kalaitis is a heck of a recruiter. And he knows his stuff. He's been around a minute. So I think that was super imperative. And yeah, you're right. Huge win right off the bat, keeping Kalaitis.
It's going to be fascinating to see how they both do. Of course, both obviously we will have some transition periods there with both of those
Yeah.
teams there, no doubt about that. And then Joe Evans. So I mean, I think there's gonna be a lot of fans will be watching those three plate schools, right? And just seeing how they do in somewhat comparison. So I think that's going to be fascinating. But certainly not the only big moves of the Carousel 2022 edition. Other notable moves: Krista Wood going from South Dakota, who I saw her last game in Orlando. Maybe I'm the kiss of death or something. We'll get to that regional down the road. But Krista Wood goes from South Dakota State to Creighton into the Big East Conference here. I think that's one of the top hires of the Carousel. If you really think about with her accomplishments, now going back home to that Omaha area to try to reunite that Creighton program and try to beef up that Big East Conference with Villanova and the job that Bridget Orchard has done there and the job that Laura Valentino at UConn and Tracy Addicks at DePaul. Now you've got that Krista Wood at Creighton, boy. Interesting how long that will take. But what was your thoughts on Krista Wood making the move to Creighton?
I have to feel like there was a certain element of she had done all she could at South Dakota State. As stacked as that lineup was, two really rock solid pitchers, and you just can't crack through. I think it's a little bit of a difference in the game nowadays, but she had a really good team, had success, put South Dakota State on the map on a national level, had really good talent. But like you say, Creighton's closer to where she's from. You know, she played at Omaha. So Creighton, of course, being in Omaha. And I think it's a new challenge at the same time. I think there's new challenges that come with being in the Big East, that come with, you know, kind of building up a Creighton program that knows what it means to succeed, hasn't done that in a few years since joining the Big East. So I think it's a new challenge. And like I said, I think she kind of had checked all the important boxes at South Dakota State. She had done a lot in a matter of a few years. She built the program. Now it's time to do it again.
No doubt about it, and that'll be interesting to see how she does in Creighton. Now, Texas A&M wasn't the only big job in the state of Texas that was unique. In fact, there was a few openings this year in the Carousel, but another one was Texas Tech, Justin. And one of the stories of the year, Texas Tech, I'll never forget. I'm on the air, and I see your name pop up on Twitter or with Extra Innings on Twitter, and I'm thinking, what's he tweeting about during the game? And it was breaking news, and that was Sammy Ward out at Texas Tech. Let's first start with that, and then get to the hire, which would be down the road later with Craig Snyder. But let's start with that because that was crazy. That happened during the season, and it was after Texas Tech had just concluded the series with Texas. So take us from there since you broke the story.
Honestly, super random on the part of Texas Tech. I'm not going to lie to you. I've covered this game a long time. I still don't understand that one, to be fully frank. Texas Tech has the bye week in the last week of the regular season because there's 7 Big 12 teams, so they're just off, and then the Big 12 tournament thereafter. And, just kind of all of a sudden, I believe it was a Sunday morning, Sammy Ward gets fired. At the time, if I remember the Texas Tech press release, they, whatever they blamed or credited for the reason for the move didn't really jive with me. I think it was one of those things where, what was in the press release, probably not necessarily the full truth. I know, shock and surprise, that never happens in the athletic department. But starting from that point of randomness, it was not that long ago that Texas Tech hired Sammy Ward. So you think, okay, well, there's going to be a pool automatically there because there was a lot of interest in that job, even in October when Sammy Ward was hired. Well, because of the way Texas Tech conducted their fired Sammy Ward and then went into their search, conducted themselves, a lot of the people in that pool who, this makes sense, are like, I'm not touching this. I'm not touching it with lead-lined gloves. So that made it more interesting on the part of Texas Tech because, some of the ones who'd been interested, finalists 2 years ago, all of a sudden won't even, listen on the phone call. Yeah, thanks, not interested. So you go through that and, you've got player transfers, you've got player unhappiness, you've got player happiness because you always have when a coach is fired. And then you go down the road and you have a few candidates and all these kinds of things. And then almost at the 10th hour, here comes Craig Snyder. It was an assistant at Texas A&M. He, on the free agent market, I guess you could say, after Tricia Ford hired at A&M as head coach. So Snyder's kind of hanging out there, doesn't have a job. You know he's going to catch on somewhere. Staying in the state of Texas was pretty imperative for him. That was a fairly well-known thing. Well, then here comes Texas Tech, and all of a sudden, Texas Tech manages to get a guy who's known in the recruiting circles. He's known as a hitting coach, and they hire him, give him his first shot as a head coach. And I think I said this. I think you had me on the podcast shortly thereafter, and I think I said this at the time. That's a home run that Texas Tech did not deserve to hit. Between the way they did Sammy Ward, the way they just kind of conducted themselves in general, that's a home run that they hit that they did not deserve to hit. But they hit one. Greg Snyder, solid hire, experienced coach, knows the state of Texas really well.
How do you think that's going to be interesting how he does in his first time there? Of course, he's going to have a familiar, talented player joining him in Herzog, joining him there at Tech.
Yeah, Mackenzie Herzog coming from A&M. She was going to be done playing. She was going to just retire, what it amounts to. And, one more year. Goes in the portal, goes Texas Tech, reunited with Snyder, who I know she was close with at A&M. Obviously had the Florida State tie before A&M. That's a difference maker. That's a difference maker for Texas Tech. It's a difference maker for the Big 12. Herzog's good. Two-way player, one of the better two-way players in the country. Hits pitches as long as she's healthy. And you've also still got Kendall Fritz, Olivia Raines sitting there, weren't terrible last year. You put Herzog at the top of that staff now, I think you've got a really solid staff. And you have the chance, not necessarily saying it's going to happen, but you have the chance of talking about a Texas Tech team that, based on the talent, could challenge for third in the Big 12. That's how difference maker. That's how big of a difference maker Herzog is.
The amusing thing to me is, Joe Evans. Obviously, Craig Snyder was the assistant to Joe Evans. The other assistant, Cara Dill, also landed a head coaching job in the state of Texas.
Yeah, UT Arlington. Stay in the state of Texas. UT Arlington moving to the WAC makes a change. Dill's been around. She played at Kentucky. She volleyed at Kentucky. She volleyed at LSU. She's been the pitching coach now at A&M. So she's been around, 3 schools in the SEC. Also played at Kentucky. I think I said that. But she learned under Rachel Lawson. She learned under Beth Torina. She learned under Joe Evans. The pedigree is excellent. You don't find many coaches with that kind of a pedigree. And I'll say this: when Dill was hired, I wasn't really sure what to make of the hire. And it's one of those things where, yes, she's been around. She's a shortstop converted to a pitching coach. She's always been that assistant. Staffs were good, not great. What do you make of it? But since Cara Dill's been at UT Arlington, her staff hires I was impressed with. I think UTA is in a good place. And you may have been leading up to this mentioning her, but I do find it interesting that all 3 coaches who were at Texas A&M last year are now all fired, what it amounts to, are now all head coaches again. Like all 3 coaches are head coaches.
Does that ever happen? Do you remember? I don't remember that happening in a carousel.
Not as far as I can remember.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated to see how she'll do there. And we've had her on the show as well. And we've had Craig Snyder on as well. Deal. Now, obviously, one of the other news of the year in 2022 in coaching, obviously, was the passing of the late Joan Joyce, the legendary head coach at Florida Atlantic. We did a couple of specials on that throughout the year on In the Circle. Check our YouTube channel. We had one of the writers at Emma who wrote about Joan Joyce on the show. So that was tough. It was tough to hear those news of her passing. So that was certainly, and it caught really a lot of the softball world. I think really the tributes, Justin, was what struck me. Beth Torina obviously was close with her. She paid tribute to her during the interview, in-game interview. Other coaches were, doing the same thing. So that was during the college season. And then, of course, after the season, the big question would be who ends up at FAU. And it turns out to be really one of the top names in the assistant coaching circles that has really picked up it. Jordan Clark from Ohio State comes in to take over the Florida Atlantic program after her time at Ohio State. Had great success there. Was at one time started out, I think, as a volunteer under Courtney Deifel at Arkansas. So that's going to be very interesting as far as really one of the top assistants. Her and Megan Bartlett, and Bonnie Toll, probably the big assistants getting the big head coaching jobs this offseason, perhaps in 2022, if you had to rank them.
Yeah, don't forget Snyder.
Craig.
Four.
Sorry, Craig. Yeah, that's right. Craig's too.
No, I mean that's the thing about FAU when Joan Joyce passed. You're right. It was a ton of tributes. Everybody had some memory of Joan Joyce, had some remembrance. The ones who didn't know or still knew Joan Joyce knew what she meant. And it was something because it was in the middle of the season. I think the thing that caught me at the time, her team still went out and played the weekend after she passed. Obviously, she'd had some health issues, so it wasn't completely out of the blue for them. But still, managing to go out there to play, to just keep doing what you're doing in tribute to her in honor of Joan Joyce, that was really special. Honestly, I thought that was really impressive of those players. And you know what? They put together a solid conference season. They did well by comparison during the conference season after Joan Joyce passed. And I think that's a tribute to those players and what that program was able to do to stay afloat in that moment. And then, like you say, after the season, who's going to take the shoes of somebody who's meant that much to the game of softball, as a player, then she coached for so long. Jordan Clark, the thing about it, yes, you're right. She was one of those assistant coaches that for a couple of years, okay, that name's there. It's like, hey, here and then there, and where's she going to end up? She ends up at FAU. Not an easy thing to do to take over for somebody who's been around as long as Joan Joyce, who's well known as Joan Joyce and as well respected as Joan Joyce. It's a hard set of shoes to fill. But I'll say this, having been on the road this fall and all that kind of stuff, the one thing I hear about FAU between Jordan Clark, the staff she hired, is the energy they brought to that program. And I do think that's something that FAU needed, a renewed energy, especially after going to the American, like being announced that they're going to the American. You need that momentum going in. And I think Clark and that staff bring that with them, bring that energy that can lead to that momentum. Definitely not an easy thing to do to take the shoes, fill the shoes of a legend, to take the place of a legend. But Jordan Clark, I'll say this for her, she took it head on. She knows the pressures that come with it, apparently, and she's willing to try. I got to say that for her.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Her and Krista Wood, probably the two high-profile hires from a mid-major, would you not say? How would you rank the mid-major head coaching hires? Krista Wood at Creighton, we've talked about Jordan Clark going to FAU. Is that your top two? And who are some of the other notable mid-major head coaching hires that you like?
Well, Joe Evans is my top one, to be honest with you.
That's true. All right. That's so weird to say.
I know it is. I know it is, because you don't think of Joe Evans as a quote-unquote mid-major coach.
That's right. Fair. So
you I've got Joe Evans, Krista Wood, Craig Nicholson. Honestly, I really like going to Akron. And then Jordan Clark, AJ Doherty at UAB. If we're going mid-majors, those are my top five. We talked about Joe Evans, we talked about Krista Wood, we talked about Jordan Clark. Nicholson had really, really good success at Ball State. Went to Arizona State, actually had a couple successful years, solid successful years before he left. He's been at A&M Kingsville, D2, had tremendous success there, led him to the National Championship Series a couple of years ago. And now he's back in D1, he's back in the MAC, and he's back at a school that needs to be built up, which is kind of his specialty when he was at Ball State and even when he was at Kingsville. He had such success in the MAC before. He knows what it takes to win there. He knows what it takes to win without a lot of resources. I really like Craig Nicholson going to Akron. Mentioned Jordan Clark. She's fourth on my mid-major list. And then AJ Doherty going to UAB. In-state hire, not a lot of spectacle, but the guy's won everywhere he's been. And for UAB, he fits the mold of what they need. So those are my top five if you were going to rank them mid-major head coaching hires.
I will personally throw in Nicole Dixon going from Stephen F. Austin to New Mexico, seeing if she can revive New Mexico there a little bit and beef up a little bit the Mountain West Conference. Can she have an impact like a Justin Schultz did last year at Boise State? Somebody like that. I don't know if they'll be that successful, but Nicole Dixon's one to watch to see what she could do at New Mexico. New Mexico, if you're not following, they have their athletic department's trying to build it back up under their AD. Their men's basketball team is undefeated under Richard Pitino, the head coach. So I think they're looking for to bounce, really make a big bounce here in the softball end with Nicole Dixon as far as those hires are concerned. Other notable hires in the major conference, Sharonda McDonald, we wondered, after going back-to-back conference championships over at Campbell, where, eventually when would she make the move and where? And of course, she ends up going to Michigan State, taking over for Jackie Joseph, who retired after the Big Ten tournament, which they hosted. So both Michigan and Michigan State, Justin, coaches retiring. Michigan State goes outside with Sharronna McDonald, who returns to the Big Ten when she was at one point an Ohio State assistant. Your thoughts on that move?
Well, I think Sharronna McDonald was another one who had done all she could at Campbell. You made the tournament 2 years in a row. You kind of ran the table almost in the conference. 1 year, you win the tournament, you win a game in the regional even. The next year, you're tied for the win in the regular season in the conference, but you do what you need to do in the tournament. You make a second NCAA tournament. And this is not a diss on Campbell, but at a program like Campbell, that's about all you could do. Like any higher success you're going to have is going to feel like replicating that. So I think she had done a lot of had a lot of success in a couple of years at Campbell. I think it was her time. Sharronna McDonald's a heck of a head coach. Got good references, got a solid track record, like I mentioned at Campbell. So a track record as an assistant and a head coach. Popular, solid recruiter. I really like that hire for Michigan State because the Michigan State program had been dormant in terms of success on the field for a long, long time. Jackie Joseph did a good job as a program leader. She turned out good assistant coaches, players who became assistant coaches elsewhere. Like she had some things like that in her favor, but on the field, Michigan State was never a factor, have not been a factor this century. I think you bring in Sharronna McDonald, it shows Michigan State wants to change that. I think Sharronna McDonald is somebody who can change that. I really like that hire. Outside of Joe Evans, to me, that's the best hire of the offseason. Sharronna McDonald to Michigan State.
Give me an under-the-radar hire you like that we haven't discussed.
Well, it's interesting. We talked about Sharronna McDonald, Jordan Clark. Jenna Hall got the Ohio head coaching job at the end of July. And that's 3 consecutive Ohio State hitting coaches. Hall, Sharronna, and Jordan Clark were all hitting coaches at Ohio State in succession of one another, who all got head coaching jobs anew this year. Clark and Hall's first, Sharronna second. I think Jenna Hall can do something at Ohio. I think she can. Ohio's a program used to winning a couple NCAA tournament appearances a few years ago, runner-up this past year in the MAC. And Jenna Hall was an assistant coach there. She's familiar with the region. She was at Ohio State. She was at Pitt. I think she can do something there. So that's one worth keeping an eye on in the MAC.
You liked another one. Her name is Deanne Pendleton Helm. Who
in Colorado.
What do you make of that move?
I like it, actually. Northern Colorado, when they hired Ben Garcia 4 years ago, brought him up from Colorado Mesa D2, kept somebody who knew the region, had success. Thing about Deanne Pendleton Helm, she's been at Colorado State for, I believe it was 17 years. Could have been 18. Been there a long time, stayed loyal, helped Colorado State get to a couple of tournaments, knows her stuff. She does. She knows her stuff. And I think the boxes that Ben Garcia checked, he was able to accomplish it at Northern Colorado. Kept the program at a certain level, helped them build in some areas like that. I think Deanne Pendleton Helm can come in, check some other boxes, kind of finish that off. I think Northern Colorado's got a chance to have some solid success with her there.
Give me the hire that you're sort of curious, that you're not sold, you want to see, you're curious how this turns out.
Can it be one we've already talked about?
Sure.
Tricia Ford, Texas A&M.
Okay.
I'll check. She's got a good track record, but I have my questions.
Fair enough. Let's talk some of the top assistant moves. We mentioned Jimmy Kalitis earlier, Arizona State. Jeff Harger comes to A&M in the move there. Joe Guthrie, UAB head coach. You mentioned earlier, Daltrey, Joe Guthrie leaving UAB to join Tricia Ford's staff, second consecutive UAB head coach to join a Tricia Ford staff. Go figure. But what is your top assistant coach move of 2022?
I like Texas A&M Commerce hiring Crystal Bustos.
Ooh, okay.
Bustos has not coached college before. She was running her own travel organization. Obviously, her name is best known from the Olympic teams. But I think the thing about that hire, and I think the reason it hits so well with me on both sides, it's Bustos coming in. She brings immediate name recognition to Commerce, a program coming up from D2. So right away, and Brittany Miller's a first-time head coach. So right away, a first-time head coach and a first-time D1 program immediately have some name recognition and notoriety. That's imperative for them. And from Bustos' perspective, she can come into a D1 team be able to do things her way, however her way is, she can do things her way without the pressure of her name. And by that, I mean, if she's at a Pac-12 school, that Pac-12 school is going to make their money, proverbially speaking. Hey, Crystal Bustos is our hitting coach. Commerce may do the same thing, but at Commerce, it's a lower pressure level of pressure, and she can just do things her way, implement her system, work with her hitters. So I think it's a really nice marriage on both sides. We'll see execution wise. I mean, the fact that she's never been a college coach, it could go one of two ways, you know. But at the end of the day, I do like Bustos going to Commerce. I think that one's the difference maker.
I thought the most interesting one to me was kind of this. You had a situation where Van Studerman back in the college game as an assistant at Illinois under Tyra Perry, taking over for Lance McMahon, who goes over to Alabama because Stephanie Vanbrinko, we didn't even mention, becomes the new head coach at Memphis. Intriguing triangle that kind of happened late because the Memphis search took a while. Obviously, replacing Natalie Poole, who, by the way, ends up at Southern Miss.
Yeah.
Taking over for Brian Levin, who leaves to be the assistant at Iowa. That's a lot of connecting the dots. I don't know if I connected them correctly or not from that standpoint. But that was a situation that I was kind of dumbfounded, I guess, to some extent on that. So, so give me your thoughts on that. And let's start with the Lance McMahon piece taking over for Vanbrinko, who's at Memphis now as a head coach. We didn't mention, we didn't get a chance to mention. So we'll allow to bring up the Vanbrinko because that is a big story. Vanbrinko's been a long-time pitching coach at Alabama, now a head coach at Memphis. We'll see how she does as a head coach there. But now you got, the Lance McMahon back in the SEC, but now with Patrick Murphy at Alabama. And then Van Studerman comes back to the sport to be the assistant at Illinois. And all of this happens because the Stephanie Vanbrinko, who Van Studerman was the pitching coach at Alabama.
There's a reason we call it a carousel, let's be honest.
Yeah, that's the definition of it.
All right, so you want to start with McMahon. I think it was a hire I didn't expect from Patrick Murphy. I think Lance McMahon's got a solid pedigree, good track record. I think it's one of those hires that for Pat Murphy, low risk, high reward. I like that one coming into Alabama. Van Studerman coming back, I thought was a real home run for Tyra Perry to get Van Studerman as her pitching coach to replace Lance McMahon. Van Studerman knows her way around the bullpen. She has led incredibly successful staffs. Whether that was at Alabama, she had success with the bullpens at Mississippi State. I really like that one, pulling Van Studerman back off the sidelines, so to speak. Really like that one for Illinois. To me, that's the best Power 5 assistant hire is Van Studerman coming back. There was someplace else you wanted me to go. Oh, Vanbrinko at Memphis. Big name for sure. Memphis got a big name as their head coach. That's could have been my answer about a move that I have a lot of doubts about, a lot of questions. But Memphis definitely got somebody with a name as their head coach, and they brought in DJ Sanders as one of their assistants, which gives them a hitting coach with a name recognized in softball circles from her playing days. Obviously, it's her first coaching job. So, Memphis at least showed they understand the value a softball program can have. They went out and got somebody who'd had, been part of some success at Alabama. They got a big name as a head coach. They got a big name as an assistant coach. Of course, Tommy Santiago finishes out the staff there. He's been at a couple of different jobs. So Memphis is one that's, worth keeping an eye on. I'm curious how things are going to go there. But you're right about it being that cycle. I mean, because you're right. Vanbrinko leaves Alabama to replace Natalie Poole, who had the USM. And, you connected all those dots. This year's carousel seemed like we had more of that than usual. Maybe not more, but in more interesting ways than usual, I guess.
Very unique.
Very unique.
Like Natalie Poole ends up at Southern Miss, taking over for Brian Levin, who goes to Iowa to be the assistant, and be the hitting coach there, takes over for Trina Prater, who Trina Prater becomes the head coach at Campbell. taking over for Sharana McDonald, who
Yeah.
goes to Michigan State. I mean, it's like 6 degrees here, which is kind
Yeah.
of what it feels like right now outside.
Amen.
Thoughts on any of those moves I just mentioned there?
Let's see. Brian Levine, I mean, he was solid at Southern Miss. Obviously going home to Iowa, he's got family there. I believe it's grandchildren. So that's obviously a big tie for him. Trina Prater, going from Iowa. I mean, she was successful as a head coach at Hampton, had moderate success at Buffalo as a head coach. Now she's back in that head coaching chair. I'm curious to see what she can do at Campbell, obviously trying to continue the success Sharana McDonald had. And Trina Prater's assistant coaching staff at Campbell, she obviously prioritized some veteran assistants. Got Aaron Arvalo, who's a veteran pitching coach, got Megan Hill, who's been a hitting coach at a couple of different places. So, staff-wise, it's interesting there too. Another one worth keeping an eye on, maybe for a little more of a hopeful reason there at Campbell.
Yeah, no doubt. Other notables of hires of the assistants there. Kendall Fern leaving Indiana, longtime assistant with Shonda Stanton and Shonda Bell, going back home to California and San Diego State under Stacy Newman's staff alongside Victoria Haywood. Really intriguing dynamic there at San Diego State. I'm really intrigued to see how that one plays itself out there. You mentioned Iowa. Mandy Gardner, pitching coach at Iowa. Kind of a sneaky, underrated move, under the radar move there, Justin, that for Coach Gillespie's staff, a new staff there, which I think could bring some extra needed energy there after a tough year last year. So I'm really intrigued by Gardner and her impact into that Iowa program.
Yeah, not a good year for Iowa last year, total assistant staff reboot. The thing about Gardner, and actually when I did my look at the Big Ten coaching moves, Mandy Gardner was my, one to watch, so to speak. She's young still. She's been at Grand Canyon. She spent a year at UC San Diego, but she's had some solid success. She's had a couple of pitchers who come out from under her who had success. I think of Jada Cecil last year at UC San Diego was a solid pitcher. I do think that's something she's somebody who can have an impact on Iowa's pitching staff. Obviously, that was something that was a strength of theirs a couple of years ago. Of course, pandemic and all that kind of stuff kind of changed the trajectory of the pitching staff, ability to have an impact. But the pitching staff was strong. So, if Iowa can have a strong pitching staff, then it'll make a difference. I think she's somebody who can have an impact for sure.
Other notables hires in the assistants, Jeff Cottrell leaving Oklahoma State goes to Missouri for Larissa Anderson's staff. Michaela Transu ends up at Binghamton. Tony Kornheiser's alma mater. Have some softball to brag about. Maybe we'll get some Binghamton softball talk on PTI, huh?
There you go.
Can we get that to go in 2020?
I like that.
Let's send that over to Tony there. Paige Cassidy, I know you like that move from Craig Snyder, going over from Liberty to Texas Tech to be the pitching coach.
I do like that one. I think she can have an impact on that staff. I really do. She has success at Liberty. I think she can have success at Texas Tech.
You got Odyssey Alexander, now in the assistant at Howard. Situation there to talk about there. And who are some of the other notable assistants that you like that stood out to you?
I think Josh Bloomer at South Carolina's one. He had success as the hitting coach at Duke. I mean, he was the hitting coach kind of presiding over their best successes in offense. So I think that makes a difference. I like that one a lot for South Carolina. I think that one makes a difference for them. I think that can really revitalize their offense. I'm trying to think who else there was. Annie Smith going to Minnesota. She was the volunteer at Arkansas. I think she brings something that Minnesota didn't have. Piper Ritter had never been a head coach. She's the head coach now. She's got a couple of years under her belt, but I think Annie Smith's kind of been around to that veteran head coach, and she can be a difference maker for them too. So I like that one kind of under the radar. You mentioned Transu, obviously going to Binghamton. Odyssey Alexander, obviously huge splash for Howard. Those are some of the ones that I do like a good bit.
Other notables too, intriguing one. Ohio State, you mentioned earlier their assistants. They bring Whitney Jones to be there, taking over for Jordan Clark. She was at UCF for a year and was at Washington prior to that. Cindy Ball-Malone then keeps it, though, in the Husky family. Jen Saling is the new assistant and assistant there at UCF. Of note, UCF and Ohio State will play the first weekend of the season.
Yeah.
So there's a little nice storyline there for you if you're into that stuff. Lisa Navis promoted to full-time assistant at South Florida. Michelle DePolo, I know you like that there at Florida Gulf Coast. They're joining David Darius. Danielle Stinger from Michigan State joining the staff there for Sharonda. So, quick final thoughts on this coaching carousel that we maybe we've left out.
I mean, I think this carousel leaves a lot of things worth watching. A lot of interesting pieces, a lot of interesting places. I'll give you the numbers: 43 head coaching moves and roughly 160 assistant coaching moves. That's a lot of changeover. I mean, it's on par with some other years on an assistant perspective. Those change over a lot, but there are quite a few this year that, I'm penciling in on my sheet to keep an eye on how it impact both head and assistant wise that those coaches have.
Well, as usual, Justin, we go long on coaching carousel. So what we're going to do is this 2022 year in review. We're going to turn it into a two-parter. In our next episode, Justin, or if you're watching on the YouTube, we'll be talking about realignment and some of the other headlines from the 2022 softball years. For Justin, thank you, Justin, for joining us for this segment, talking 2022 coaching carousel here on In the Circle.